All right, so I've got the scene here that we're looking at. This is looking at issues of noise and whatnot. And just a couple of notes. First thing that I did is just take all of the geometry and the cameras and everything and drag and drop them into a totally new scene. A lot of times you'll find that that starting in a fresh scene with all of the settings reset can really help to fine tune things after you've been messing with it for a while, especially on frustrating scenes where there's a lot of stuff to fix and adjust and whatnot. So all of our render settings and all of our things like that are going to be set to default. So here's the scene, and let me just start it rendering here again. And you see we've got a lot of noise like up through here. We've got a lot of noise all over here. We also have a lot of this waviness, and that's because I've reset all of the lighting to default. So we end up with this wavy undulation that's a big part of a Radiance caching. And we'll deal with this kind of in two stages. And the first stage is going to be to get rid of the general noise. Then we'll clean up the Radiance cache stuff, and then we can reintroduce things that would cause noise, but that gives us a controlled way of looking at them so that you can more easily fine-tune what's going on. All right, so first of all, we can look here at where we're getting noise. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on this material up here. And if we go to our material ref, we'll see this is just the basic 901 physically based material. So it's 80% diffuse, 4% specular, and then 100% Fresnel. Blurry Reflections set onto 40%. So the big difference between Moto 901 and 801 or anything previous before 901 is that by default with this physically based shader, you turn it on and you're promising yourself blurry reflections everywhere. And by nature, that's going to cause a lot of noise. So noise is going to come from a couple of different things. Noise is going to come from either lighting, either direct or indirect lighting. It's going to come from materials, usually in reflection, or in material refraction if you have something like blurry reflection turned on. So if you can kind of categorize what the noise is into a couple of those different things, you can pretty easily start to knock it out. So with this one, the main part of the noise that we're seeing all over everywhere is going to be based off of that blurry reflection. So just so that I can deal with lighting, I'm going to turn off the blurry reflection here entirely. So I'm going to set my specular amount to 0 and my Fresnel to 0, and we'll see that all across these smooth areas here is going to suddenly get a lot cleaner. And another thing that you can do here, and actually here, let me turn that back on, is you can use the this kind of debug option here with the heat map, which is new in 901, and I really like it. Puts some debugging stuff more right in your hands instead of having to go and hunt for it. So if we just let this go for a second here, red is going to be completely not converged. It will eventually go to gray, which will mean it's about midway on convergence, and then it will go to blue, which means it's converged and it's essentially gotten rid of the noise. And we're talking about noise like graininess, not noise like the undulations that we'll see in a Radiance caching. So you can see this is kind of taking its time to clarify things. And if I mouse over areas, just to kind of speed it up here, it still gets a lot of kind of speckled bits on there, and it takes a little while. So if I go ahead and turn that specularity and the Fresnel off, so let's go to 0 and 0, what we should see is, let's go for a second and get started. Immediately you can see obviously it's a lot cleaner like we had done before, but okay, there we go. Here comes the heat map. So if I just kind of mouse across this, you'll see even just with a swipe of the mouse that heat map is turning blue. It's not even taking time to turn gray and then blue. It's just going straight to blue. We'll still keep some red around the edges because edges will tend to converge a little bit more slowly. But you can see how much more quickly this is resolving now. All right, so now down here on the floors, we still have that blurry reflection. So you'll see it's going to go, we're not getting too much gray. It's going pretty much through to blue, but it's getting spotty, So if I turn that back off now, so we'll go back to heat map and turn it to none, you can see that general noise is gone from there. We still have it on this blue kind of purpley blue color material, and we still have it here on the floor. So let's look at those here next. So if we click on this one, this is essentially just a variation on that basic material where we've got it's the same 84 and then 100, but with some different diffuse color. So there are a couple of things you can do on things like this where you have something colorized that has blurry reflections. And one thing that you can do it's definitely a cheat, but will help reduce the noise, and it's not really reducing it, it's just hiding it a little bit, is to tint your specular color. So I'm going to just kind of put this somewhere in the ballpark, like a little bit lighter version of what you have in the diffuse color. And what that will do is it's going to make the noise have a little less contrast, because now the reflected color and the specular color is not the same as is more closer to the same as the diffuse color. So there's going to be less contrast, and it will kind of hide it a little bit. So you can see this looks like it refines a bit more quickly. It's really not, but it's just lower contrast noise. So that's cool. So again, I'm going to go back here, and since we've just got that figured out, now let's just go ahead and zero out the reflection and everything. And you can see, again, just like on the other part, it instantly goes to being smooth. Okay, so next let's move on to these floorboards here. And since these have a little bit more complicated, they're not just the 4 and 100, we'll leave the reflection on. But what I'm going to do in order to, again, kind of troubleshoot this is I'm just going to take the roughness and set it down to 0. Because with no roughness, we have no blur on the reflection, which means that really the reflection won't give us any grain. So any grain now is just going to be coming from lighting, essentially. And there's a little bit more here actually in 901 with the physically based render, but we won't get into that right now. Just try and keep this moderately simple. So there we go. Okay, so now you can see grain, not an issue. So if we switch over and show our heat map, we set it to convergence, should see that it goes to all blue pretty quickly. Okay. In all these areas, we're getting the blue. Okay, so now let's start looking at the issue of the other kind of noise, which is going to be that irradiance cache noise. Let's go ahead and turn our heat map up to 0, turn it off. And okay, so now we can see we've got something that is clean as far as grain, but noisy as far as, these irradiance cache values. So very first off is we want to have more than one indirect bounce. Most interior scenes, unless you have a bunch of lights, you want more than one indirect bounce. So we'll set it up to 2. We could go higher. I'll set it up to 3 here just so we can kind of get the idea. And you can see that this is going to give the effect of clearing up a lot of that just right off the bat, because it's just adding some secondary and tertiary illumination. And it really isn't getting rid of it. It's just, again, just like with changing the specular color on this blue part, it's just kind of making it lower contrast, but it's definitely helping a little bit. Okay, so the next thing that we can do is to start increasing the number of irradiance rays. And that's going to help, but it's not going to clear this up. So let's start here by taking irradiance rays, and I'm going to set it up to 1024. Okay, and then we'll leave everything else the same. And again, we'll just hop in here. We'll see that a lot of these areas should clear up quite a bit, but we'll still see some of this noise and this undulation, especially in areas where we've got a lot of secondary lighting. And that's because the secondary lighting, you use a secondary irradiance cache, and it by default is only 1/4 the amount of irradiance rate as your primary. So here we've got 1024. That means everywhere else it's only doing at most 256. So there are 2 things you have to set in order to fix this. And the first is in your preferences. So I'm going to go to preferences, and here under preview, you can see that use secondary irradiance cache is turned to always. Default is, I think it's never, but you might want to make sure that's set to always. And then we'll close that. And then the other place to look here is if you select the render item here and go to channels, you'll see that we have the irradiance rays, which is our 1024 that we had set, and then we have secondary rays, which is set to 25%. That's going to be a big culprit, and that's going to account for a lot of this kind of noisiness a lot of times. So I'm going to take and set my secondary irradiance to 100, and that's going to smooth out wherever we have kind of secondary lighting. So let's check down here. We should see this. Now, it will resolve a little bit more slowly because now we're actually starting to increase the quality. Since we've gotten rid of all of the reflection noise, we're now looking at clearing up the other noise. So something like this. We should see this is going to be mostly pretty good in here. Now, there are going to be problem child areas here where you've got like a bunch of dense geometry. And some areas like this, really the only way to get it really clean is to really bump up your samples, or to use either brute force Monte Carlo or a hybrid rendering scenario, which we'll look at both here, though I'm not going to go into too much depth on either of those. But there you can see this is starting to look quite a bit better. And here, I'll just pause for a minute, and we'll let this resolve. All right, so that's resolved a little bit now, and you can kind of get the idea. Okay, so we can see that this way we've gone and removed a lot of the noise, a lot of the grain issues, and we've just left with a little bit of this irradiance cache stuff. So I want to show you just a couple of places that you can look to clean up the irradiance cache stuff. So if we go back over here to render and global illumination, so the next place to look is going to be your irradiance rate, ratio, and interpolation values. And so basically the irradiance rate is going to be how closely together the irradiance cache samples are packed. And then the ratio is going to be how we derive how far apart the samples can be. So so this is as close as they can be. The rate times the ratio gives you the maximum distance. So so the closest they can be together here at default is 2.5 pixels apart. The farthest away they can be then is 15 pixels because it's 2.5 times 6. Okay, and so if we want to, we can do a couple of things to kind of improve the noise here, or this kind of noise. And the first thing would be if we decrease the rate, then that noise is going to get smaller, but it's also going to take longer to render. Okay, we could increase the rate, and that's going to actually speed up the render, and it's going to make this stuff a little bit wider spread, which can work. And then the interpolation values is going to be how much time goes into blending between the various samples. So I'm going to start here just by increasing the interpolation values all the way up to 8, which is the maximum, and we're just going to worry here about kind of one of these corners over here instead of going over the whole thing. So you can see that has really reduced the amount of noise right through there. So we can check it over here on another area too. See, that reduces it a lot, and a lot of this is going to be just kind of blurring and reducing the contrast, just like with adding the secondary lighting and with changing the reflection values here. So that can help though, and that will reduce some of it. And the next thing to look at is going to be, do you want it to be more accurate and obviously take a little longer? Then you want to reduce the rate. But then you also want to increase the ratio because the big flat areas, like here on this big circle, still aren't going to need any more samples. So if I do something like reduce my rate to 1, I would want to then increase my ratio to 15 so that we retain these big flat areas not needing to use so many samples. So it's going to kind of balance things out and make it not take much longer. But here, let's go ahead and I'll just focus in actually here. Let me, on the bottom here, go to my camera view. And let's see, which camera are we on here? Okay, we're on camera 2, good. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to turn on my render region tool. I'm just going to focus right down here in the corner because that's really all we need to look at. That way we can focus on this. So we've got good examples of just about everything that we're looking at right down in here. So you can see that our noise has gotten tighter, okay? And oops, it's taking a second to refine there. There we go. Okay, here we go. Now it's finally coming along. I don't know why this is taking its sweet time. There we go. So that's looking definitely a little bit better. It's tighter. It's a little bit smoother. So that's helping. And the other thing is when you're working on this, if you increase your number of irradiance rays, that's also going to pack everything in better. So if I take this, and I turn this up to 2048. And then I leave this at 1 and 15, and oops, I need to set that back up to 8. Then we should get something that's starting to look pretty smooth. But at this point, we're starting to get definitely slower renders. And the one thing to remember here is if you're using the preview render, and I can talk about this while this resolves a little bit. If you're using the preview render, this kind of noise, the undulating noise of irradiance caching, will not always resolve over time. So you can let this bake for a long time, but since this is based off of these values, it's not going to always get better. Okay, so if you want to let something just sit and bake here for an hour, while you go to lunch or overnight, if you've got a bunch of or a big image to worry about, then you'll want to do something different here, which I'll look at in a second. So that's one way you can go. You can also go the other way. So I'm going to set this. I'm going to double what my original value was at 2.5, and I'm going to set it to 5. And my radiance rate, I'm going to set then to 3. I'm still going to keep that maximum value at 15 pixels. So 5 times 3 is 15. So let's go ahead and let that go. And what we'll see here is that this is going to look smoother overall, but it's also going to be a little less accurate. So in some of these areas, here, let me go ahead and turn off my render region now so we can see this in other areas. But we are going to get less accuracy. So you're trading speed for accuracy at this point. So increasing the radiance rate and decreasing the ratio will give you smoother renders that are less accurate, but will, just undo that. But it will, yeah, what was I saying there? Sorry, increasing the rate, decreasing the ratio will give you smoother renders that will render quicker, but will be less accurate. Decreasing the rate and increasing the ratio will give you closer and closer to an unbiased render, so a more accurate render, but it's going to take longer to render because you may end up having to drive that radiance rate down pretty low. But you can see here with this set to 5, 3, and 8, we start to get stuff pretty smooth. And once you start applying textures, a lot of this stuff becomes kind of a moot point as long as it's relatively subtle because it's going to be hidden in the textures anyway. And also, if you're doing this on animation, then you can turn on walkthrough mode, and then it's going to make that undulation at least hold still so it doesn't flicker from frame to frame. Okay, so moving on here, last thing that we can look at then is going to be saying, okay, I really want a very clean render. I want it to look good, and I don't really care so much about the time. That's going to be when you'll use hybrid rendering here. So for this, we'll change the use IC from first and second bounces to second only. So that means that the primary lighting pass is going to be done with Monte Carlo. And at first, it's going to look like garbage. And that's just because it's starting at a very low sampling rate, and it's just going to increase from there. Okay? So you can see, though, if I mouse over an area here, actually, let's use this area down here in the corner where we had been using. So here on the bottom right, we can see that, yeah, it takes a little longer to resolve. But it's much cleaner, much more accurate. You can see we're actually getting like a relatively straight line off of this shadow, where before it was a little bit muddled. Okay. And I'm not going to take the time to let this whole thing resolve here because you can kind of get the point at this point. But so this is going to be your most accurate, longest rendering, but definitely will look really good in the end. So, if I were to sit and let this cook here for half an hour or something, it's going to look pretty good. And the other thing to note is that you want to pay attention down here at the bottom to your convergence rate, which is going to be how close to, in this case, how close to an unbiased render you're getting. So when you're using this hybrid mode, you really actually are looking towards an unbiased render that's going to not have any of those undulation, irradiance cache errors, but the closer it gets to be fully converged, the less noise it's going to get. You'll probably want to have this set to something like 99.5. I keep mine at like 99.9. You can go all the way to 100 if you want, which means it's never going to stop rendering. But at 99.9, it will eventually stop rendering, and it's going to look pretty smooth. But that way it's not, if you forget and leave it going over the weekend, it's not going to render for 48 hours straight. It's going to render until it gets to 99.9, and then it's going to stop. All right, so then the last thing that you can look at here would be to go back and start layering the materials back on top. So if you still want to have blurry reflections on all this stuff, you can go ahead and turn it on. But once you have the lighting situated, you can then go ahead and start reintroducing blurry reflections, and then all you're going to be dealing with in that case is going to be the reflection sampling. So again, if you're using the preview render to render, you don't have to worry about fudging or messing with the settings at all. You can leave it at the default, which is 64 rays, and it's eventually going to resolve. But just know that you're layering If you're doing this kind of render here, like we've got going, you're going to be layering noise for lighting on top of noise for reflections. So there's going to be 2 layers of noise going on, and they are going to fight with each other. So you have to wait longer for that to resolve. So usually your best bet, if you want to go and start putting those reflections back on, is going to be to not use the hybrid unless you have a lot of time to wait. It's going to be setting this back to first and second bounces for our Radiance cache. And then here, actually, let me go ahead and I'll turn some blurry reflection back on here. So let's go to 4 and 100. And we'll see that we are going to get some of our noise back, but this is going to take a second because it's switching gears from the Monte Carlo. But there we go. So you can see here, we're going to get some of that noise back, but now the noise that we're getting is only based off of the blurry reflections. And that can help you to understand how this is going to resolve. And another thing to note is wherever you can reduce the amount of things that have noise, the faster you're going to get clean results. So if I take something like the specular amount here, if I only want to have the Fresnel reflections and I turn specular amount, so the facing angle down to 0, it's going to remove some of the reflections, just when the polygons are facing directly at us, like on this back wall, but it's going to cause it to resolve significantly more quickly because it's not having to calculate any reflection except for the Fresnel reflection. So you can see back here on this back wall, this is resolving relatively quickly. It's looking smooth, it's looking clean, but then as we get here towards this ceiling where we have this Fresnel reflection kicking in, you still get the noise, but it's going to be, it's only the Fresnel noise that it's dealing with now. So hopefully that helps. It gets you at least started cleaning up any scenes like this, any of these interior scenes. This should help. I'm working on a much longer, more full-featured series of videos that would go into stuff like this. So, but I don't have those ready yet. So if this is something that would be of interest to you, definitely let me know, comments or whatever. But hopefully that helps. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.